There are 53 inmates on death row in Tennessee. The only woman is 43-year-old Christa Pike.
When we think about the death penalty, we often assume the convicts facing execution are hardened adult criminals. But that's not always the case. There's a lesser-known group of young people, teenagers, even children, who have been sentenced to death for their crimes.
I mean, for maybe 10, 15 years into my sentence, I really didn't even understand what happened.
What were the circumstances of their crimes? And critically, should the ultimate punishment of execution even apply to minors in the first place? So let's dive in and take a closer look at the youngest inmates on death row and the debates surrounding this highly controversial practice. Christa Pike. Christa Pike slaughtered her classmate and paraded with a part of her skull. Born in 1976 to Carissa Hansen and Emil Glenn Pike in Beckley, West Virginia, her parents had a tumultuous relationship. They were married for 2 years, divorced for a year after Hansen was found cheating, and remarried for another 2 years after Hansen attempted suicide. Both parents were frequently negligent. An aunt noted that infant Pike would crawl through piles of dog stool all over the house. Hansen wanted to keep partying even when she received news that her toddler was experiencing severe seizures. Pike's paternal grandmother often cared for her, and Pike believed she was the only one who ever loved her. When her grandmother died in 1988, Pike made her first suicide attempt at age 12, but she received little support. Pike's teenage years were unstable. She experienced and committed violence. One of her mother's boyfriends punched her in the face. Criminal charges were filed but later settled. While staying with her father's new family, one young half-sister claimed Pike molested her, causing her father to send her away. Pike also claimed to have been assaulted or molested several times, but her friends and family doubted these occurrences, noting her tendency to lie. In one incident, a man phoned claiming he would harass her. Pike and a friend responded by beating him with a stick in a parking lot. Although she was bright as a child, her unstable home life caused her to frequently change schools, and her academic performance deteriorated. In 10th grade, she was sent to a juvenile facility for a year, where she became interested in the Job Corps, a government program offering vocational training to low-income youth. In the fall of 1994, Pike attended the now-closed Job Corps Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. There, she began dating Tadarrell Shipp, a year younger than her. Together, they developed an interest in the occult and devil worship. Pike became jealous of her classmate Colleen Slemmer, suspecting her of trying to steal Shipp. Pike, Shipp, and Shadala Peterson lured Slemmer to an isolated, abandoned steam plant near the University of Tennessee campus. They offered Slemmer marijuana to lure her. Upon arrival, Pike and Shipp attacked Slemmer while Peterson acted as lookout. For 30 minutes, Slemmer was taunted, beaten, and slashed. A pentagram was carved into her chest. Finally, Pike smashed Slemmer's skull with a large chunk of asphalt, killing her. Pike kept a piece of Slemmer's skull. Pike showed off the piece of skull around the school. Within 36 hours, she, Shipp, and Peterson were arrested. The logbook showed that Pike, Shipp, Peterson, and Slemmer left together, and only 3 returned. Detectives found the piece of skull in Pike's jacket pocket. Pike confessed to the crime but claimed they only intended to scare Slemmer. During Pike's trial, the prosecution had strong evidence and Pike's confession. Pike was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. On March 22, 1996, Pike was found guilty on both counts. On March 30, Pike was sentenced to death by electrocution and 25 years in prison for conspiracy. Shipp received a life sentence with the possibility of parole plus 25 years. Peterson, who turned informant, received probation. Following her conviction, Pike launched, canceled, and relaunched multiple appeals. Her requests for a new trial were denied, and she was returned to death row. Appeals in federal court were also rejected, and as of the latest rulings, Pike remains on death row. On August 24, 2001, Christa Pike, with alleged help from inmate Natasha Cornett, attacked fellow inmate Patricia Jones. Pike tried to strangle Jones with a shoelace and nearly succeeded. Jones was serving a life sentence for the 1995 murder of 84-year-old Alberta Coker in Knoxville. Pike was convicted of attempted first-degree murder on August 12, 2004. Although the Tennessee Department of Corrections believed Cornett assisted in the attack, there was not enough evidence to charge her. Later, it was discovered that Pike had planned an escape involving corrections officer Justin Heflin and a New Jersey man named Donald Kohut. Kohut, a personal trainer, began writing to Pike in early 2011. By July, Kohut was visiting Pike in Nashville once or twice a month. Kohut and Pike planned her escape, enlisting Heflin, who agreed to help in exchange for cash and gifts. Details about the plan were limited due to security concerns. However, an indictment revealed that a prison key would be traced and duplicated. In early 2012, prison staff received information about the escape plot. This led to a joint investigation by the Tennessee Department of Corrections, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation (TBI), and the New Jersey State Police. The TBI stated that the plan was not far along and the jailbreak was not imminent. In March 2012, Kohut was arrested and charged with bribery and conspiracy to commit escape. Heflin was arrested and charged with bribery, official misconduct, and conspiracy to commit escape. Pike was not charged, and investigators were unsure if she was involved beyond being aware of the plan. On May 31, 2012, Kohut was sentenced to 7 years in prison to be served at the Tennessee State Northeast Correctional Complex. Heflin, who cooperated with authorities, did not serve prison time, but was fired from his job. On August 27, 2020, Tennessee Attorney General Herbert Slattery's office requested an execution date for Pike. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and other factors, Pike's attorneys received extensions to argue against her execution. On June 7, 2021, Pike's attorneys filed a motion to oppose the execution date and requested a certificate of commutation, but the motion was denied. By November 2022, Pike had exhausted all appeals. However, the state Supreme Court found that sentencing juveniles to life without parole was unconstitutional. On August 30, 2023, Pike's lawyers used this ruling to try to overturn her 1996 conviction and sentence, arguing her young age and mental health should spare her from execution. In October 2023, Judge Scott Green denied Pike's request, stating the ruling applied only to juveniles, not adults. As of March 10, 2024, the state had not set an execution date for Pike. If executed, Pike would be the first woman executed in Tennessee in nearly 200 years. Paula Cooper. Paula Cooper's story begins with a difficult childhood marked by abuse and instability. Born on August 25, 1969, Paula and her sister experienced unimaginable horrors. Their mother, troubled by her own issues, tried to take their lives when they were young girls, leaving deep scars on Paula. As Paula and her sister grew older, they were trapped in a cycle of abuse. Their father was a figure of terror, subjecting them to frequent physical and emotional torment. Desperate to escape, the sisters begged authorities to remove them from their home, but no one listened. During this tough time, Paula became friends with Karen and April Totha. They found comfort in each other's company, often skipping school and indulging in activities that gave them temporary relief from their troubled lives. In May 1985, 15th-year-old Paula, Karen, and April made a plan that would change their lives forever. Driven by desperation and a need for quick money, they targeted the home of 78-year-old Ruth Pelkey, a neighbor in Gary, Indiana. Pretending to seek Bible lessons, the girls entered Ruth's home, unaware of the horrors to come. What started as an innocent visit quickly turned into a nightmare. Inside Ruth's home, tensions rose. One of the girls, driven by fear and adrenaline, hit Ruth with a vase, causing her to bleed. In a moment of unimaginable brutality, Paula took a butcher knife and began stabbing Ruth repeatedly. Ruth's cries for help were drowned out by the violence. Paula's frenzied stabbing continued, each blow causing more damage to Ruth's chest and stomach. The scene was horrifying, a clash between lost innocence and human darkness. As Ruth lay dying, Paula and her friends searched the house for valuables. They stole $10 and the keys to Ruth's 1976 Plymouth, leaving behind a lifeless body and a shattered community. Ruth's stepson soon discovered the gruesome scene, and authorities were called to investigate. The community of Gary, Indiana, was shocked by such a heinous crime committed by teenagers who were once seen as neighbors and friends. The investigation quickly led to the arrest of Paula, Karen, April, and Denise, another friend involved in the planning but not present during the murder. The girls now faced the consequences of their actions, and the wheels of justice began to turn. In the aftermath of the murder, the community struggled to understand the darkness that had consumed Paula and her friends. The Lake County prosecutor, Jack Crawford, sought the harshest punishment for Paula, believing the crime deserved nothing less than the death penalty. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the details of Paula Cooper's troubled upbringing and the circumstances surrounding the crime came to light. Her defense attorneys portrayed her as a young girl who had been a victim of abuse and a product of a broken system that failed to protect her. However, despite these heartbreaking revelations, there was little doubt about Paula's guilt in the eyes of the law. The trial captivated the nation, drawing attention from around the world. The international uproar was especially pronounced in Europe, where Paula's age and the severity of her sentence sparked outrage. News of the crime spread rapidly, capturing the attention of people globally. Many Europeans were particularly disturbed by the fact that a teenager could face the death penalty. The international outcry reached its peak when Pope John Paul II condemned the decision to seek the death penalty for Paula. Advocacy groups and human rights organizations rallied behind Paula's cause, arguing that her age and troubled background should be considered. They believed that a punishment as severe as the death penalty was unjust and failed to address the underlying issues that led to Paula's involvement in the crime. The case also sparked a broader conversation about the treatment of young offenders within the criminal justice system. Many questioned whether it was appropriate to hold teenagers fully accountable for their actions, especially when they had experienced a history of abuse and trauma. In 1989, after years of legal battles and public outcry, Paula's sentence was commuted to 60 years in prison. This decision brought relief to some, but also ignited a fierce debate about the ethics of capital punishment and the treatment of juvenile offenders. Paula's case became a symbol of the complexities and flaws within the criminal justice system. It highlighted the need for a more nuanced approach to dealing with young offenders, one that takes into account their individual circumstances and provides opportunities for rehabilitation and redemption. Throughout her time in prison, Paula worked tirelessly to better herself. She earned her general education diploma GED and pursued college correspondence courses, determined to make the most of her second chance at life. Her story became a testament to the power of personal growth and the potential for redemption, even in the face of unimaginable circumstances. On June 17, 2015, after nearly 27 years behind bars, Paula was released from Rockville Correctional Facility. Her release marked a new chapter in her life, one filled with both hope and uncertainty. However, tragically, Paula's newfound freedom was short-lived. On May 26, 2015, she died by suicide, leaving behind a legacy of pain and unanswered questions. George Stinny Jr. In a small, segregated town in the Deep South, the year was 1944. A 14-year-old boy named George Stinny Jr. stood just over 5 feet tall, his slight frame barely reaching 90 pounds. but the weight of the world was about to come crashing down on his young shoulders. George lived in the African-American side of Alcolu, South Carolina, a working-class mill town divided by railroad tracks. His father worked at the local sawmill, providing for George, his brother, and two sisters in their modest family home. Though their lives were humble, they were filled with the promise of youth, until one fateful March day when two young white girls, Betty and Mary, vanished without a trace. Their battered bodies were found the next morning, victims of a brutal crime that would shake the town to its core. And in a tragically swift turn of events, the finger of blame was pointed squarely at George, a shy, gentle boy who by all accounts had never shown any violent tendencies. Taken into custody without his parents, George was interrogated alone. Though the law required legal representation, this was still 1944, years before the Supreme Court would mandate the right to counsel. Somehow, a confession was obtained, and George was swiftly put on trial. On April 24, 1944, the entire legal proceeding against 14-year-old George Stinny took place, including jury selection. Stinny's court-appointed counsel was Charles Plowden, a tax commissioner who was campaigning for election to local office. Plowden did not challenge the three police officers who testified that Stinny had confessed to the murders, nor did he make any real effort to defend his young client. He also failed to contest the prosecution's presentation of two conflicting versions of Stinny's alleged verbal confession. The prosecution's witnesses included Reverend Francis Batson, who had discovered the bodies of the two young girls, and the two doctors who performed the autopsies. The court even allowed discussion of the possibility of rape based on bruising found on one of the victims' genitalia. Stinny's counsel called no witnesses and conducted little to no cross-examination. The entire trial presentation lasted a mere 2.5 hours. The courtroom was packed with over 1,000 white spectators, but no black Americans were allowed to attend. Stinny was tried before an all-white jury, as was typical for the time in the segregated South, where most African Americans were effectively disenfranchised and barred from jury service. After deliberating for less than 10 minutes, the jury found Stinny guilty of murder. Judge Philip Stoll then sentenced the 14-year-old to death by electrocution. There is no transcript of the trial, and Stinny's counsel filed no appeal. His family, churches, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, pleaded with Governor Olin Johnston for clemency, citing Stinny's young age. Many of the pleas for mercy came from white women in South Carolina, some of whom expressed discomfort at the prospect of executing someone so young, while others affirmed their belief in white supremacy. The governor ultimately denied the requests for clemency and visited Stinny in the death house just 2 days before his scheduled execution on June 16, 1944. George Stinny's parents were only allowed to see him once after the trial, while he was being held in the Columbia Penitentiary. They were not allowed any other visits, due to the threat of lynching. Stinny's execution at age 14 was virtually unheard of in the United States at the time, even for black children convicted of crimes against white victims in the Jim Crow South. On the day of his execution, Stinny was prepared for the electric chair using a Bible as a booster seat, as he was too small for the chair. He was restrained, and the executioner placed a strap over his mouth, causing him to break down in tears. When the electricity was applied, the mask slipped off, revealing Stinny's face streaked with tears. And so, the youngest person executed in 20th century America drew his last breath, robbed of his youth, his innocence, and any semblance of due process. He was buried in an unmarked grave at the Calvary Baptist Church Cemetery in Lee County, South Carolina. The Stinny family was devastated. George's father lost his job, and they were forced to flee their home, fearing for their safety in the wake of the tragedy. For decades, this miscarriage of justice lay forgotten, the boy's name consigned to obscurity. But in 2014, a judge finally had the courage to right this terrible wrong. George Stinny's conviction was vacated, his execution deemed an egregious violation of his constitutional rights. Though it came 70 years too late, it was a bittersweet vindication for a life so cruelly sacrificed on the altar of racism and injustice. George Stinny's unjust fate has resonated powerfully in the ongoing debate over capital punishment in the United States. His story has become a rallying cry for those who argue that the death penalty is an inhumane and fallible system that must be abolished. In 2022, the introduction of the George Stinny Fund by South Carolina lawmaker Caesar McKnight represents a potentially groundbreaking step towards providing restitution for the families of those who have been wrongfully executed. It is a bittersweet acknowledgement of the immense harm done and a glimmer of hope that justice, even if long delayed, may one day be served. Vienna Brinker. In the summer of 1837, the small town of Steelville, Missouri, was rocked by a shocking crime that would become one of the most notorious cases in the state's history. Mary, an enslaved teenage girl, stood accused of the murder of 2-year-old Vienna Brinker, the daughter of her owners. Though the details of the case were gruesome, what made it truly exceptional was Mary's young age. At just 13 or 14 years old, she would become the youngest person ever executed in the state of Missouri. Mary's story began in the 1810s, when her original owner, Abraham Brinker, settled in the town of Potosi. Abraham was a prosperous farmer who owned several enslaved people, including Mary, who was described as mulatto in contemporary records, though the exact nature of her racial background remains unclear. In 1833, tragedy struck when Abraham was killed by Native Americans, and his property, including his slaves, passed to his son John. John Brinker and his wife Sarah had a young daughter named Vienna, born in 1835, and Mary was assigned the task of caring for the toddler. In 1837, the family moved into a single-story log cabin near Steelville, and it was here that the horrific events unfolded. On May 14, 1837, the body of Vienna Brinker was discovered in a stream on the Brinker property. She had suffered severe blunt trauma to her head. Mary, who had been sent by Sarah Brinker to gather firewood with Vienna, returned alone, claiming not to know where the child was. A search party, led by John Brinker and 2 neighbors, eventually found Vienna's body in the stream. Faced with this grim discovery, Mary confessed to throwing the toddler into the water and then beating her body with a stick to prevent it from surfacing. The motive for the crime remains unclear, though some have speculated that it may have been related to fears that Mary's owner, John Brinker, was planning to sell her. Mary was promptly arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Her trial began on August 16, 1837, with 3 court-appointed attorneys defending her. Despite their efforts, Mary was found guilty 2 days later and sentenced to be hanged on September 30th. However, the legal proceedings were far from over. Mary appealed the verdict to the Missouri Supreme Court, and the presiding judge, Matthias McGurk, ultimately reversed the decision, citing numerous irregularities in the initial trial. A new trial was ordered, and this time it was held in Crawford County. The second trial returned the same guilty verdict as the first, and on August 11, 1838, Mary was finally hanged in Steelville. Contemporary reports estimated her age to be either 13 or 14, though a later historical account put it at 16. Regardless of the exact figure, Mary's youth was a key factor in the case, with the trial judge instructing the jury to consider whether she had reached the age of criminal responsibility, 14, or whether she was below that age but still had sufficient mind to know what act would be a crime. The tragic case of Mary's execution at such a young age sparked widespread debate and controversy at the time. Many questioned the fairness of the legal process and the appropriateness of sentencing a child to death, even in an era when capital punishment for minors was not uncommon. The case also highlighted the stark realities of slavery in 19th century America, where enslaved individuals like Mary had little recourse or protection under the law. Her execution has become a symbol of the cruelties and inequities of the slave system, and a cautionary tale about the dangers of a criminal justice system that all too often failed to account for the unique vulnerabilities of children. Hannah Oish. Hannah Oish was a young Pequot Native American girl, born in March 1774 in Groton, Connecticut. From a very young age, her life was marked by hardship and prejudice. Hannah's mother was described by the local minister as an abandoned creature, much addicted to the vice of drunkenness. When Hannah was just 6 years old, she and her older brother were accused of a shocking crime. They had allegedly attacked a young girl, beating her nearly to death in an attempt to steal her clothes and a valuable gold necklace she was wearing. This violent incident led the authorities to conclude the two children should be sent away and sent to other families in an effort to correct their troubling behavior. Hannah's mother resisted this, but eventually left her daughter at a house several miles from their home, promising to return, though she did not for many months. During this time, Hannah lived with the other family, where she continued to display what were seen as alarming traits: theft, lying, and a maliciousness of disposition that frightened the other children. The minister, who would later preach a sermon about her execution, described Hannah as having a degree of artful cunning and sagacity beyond many of her years, though he conceded her mind wanted to be properly instructed and her disposition to be corrected. Tragically, in July 1786, when Hannah was just 12 years old, she was accused of murdering Eunice Bolas, the 6-year-old daughter of a wealthy local farmer. On July 21, 1786, the body of 6-year-old Eunice was found dead on the road near her home. Eunice was the daughter of a wealthy farmer. When the police questioned Hannah, she said she had seen 4 boys near the crime scene, but the police could not find those boys. The police questioned Hannah again, and she ended up confessing to the murder. Hannah said she had planned to get revenge on Eunice. A few weeks earlier, Eunice had reported Hannah for stealing fruit during the strawberry harvest. On the day of the murder, Hannah saw Eunice walking to school. She lured Eunice away with the promise of a gift of calico, a type of cloth. Then Hannah beat Eunice with a rock and strangled her to death. She placed rocks around the body to make it look like an accident. The next day, Hannah was arrested and charged with Eunice's murder. Her only evidence against her was her own confession. At the time, the Fifth Amendment, the right to not incriminate yourself, did not exist. During her trial, Hannah pleaded not guilty on the advice of her lawyer, but the court still found her guilty of murder. The judge said that even though she was young, he had to punish her severely to send a message that children cannot commit such terrible crimes without facing consequences. On December 20th, 1786, when Hannah was 12 years old, she was hanged for the murder of Eunice Bolas. Witnesses said she was very afraid and seemed to want someone to help her as she was led to the gallows. In the years since, historians have debated the details of this tragic case. Some believe Hannah may have had an intellectual disability that affected her judgment. Others argue the evidence against her was weak and that she was condemned more because of her Native American background than any proven crime. The handling of Hannah's case highlights many problems with the criminal justice system at the time. Age and disability were not considered mitigating factors. Only swift and severe punishment was seen as acceptable. The prejudiced language used to describe Hannah also suggests she was viewed through a lens of bigotry from the start. Hannah Oish's story remains a disturbing chapter in American history. Her execution as a child forces us to reckon with the legacy of systemic racism and injustice that have long plagued our society. By remembering Hannah, we must recommit ourselves to building a more equitable and compassionate justice system, one that protects the most vulnerable and ensures such tragedies are never repeated. Thank you for watching and see you in next video.